sweet dreams are made of this.
I've debated posting this. It sounds crazy, but it actually happened. And my ex experienced it as well. We still bring it up from time to time. So, I used to live on the BBCI reservation in the Smoky Mountains. There's a spot called Thomas Divide, and it's been known for decades to have unexplained floating orbs. You're supposed to pull off at that lookout, flash your light 3 times at the mountains and wait. It's a known phenomena that's even been written about. So one night my ex and I decide to go check it out. We drive up to the pull-off at night, park on the left side of the clearing, turn off the vehicle, flash our lights 3 times at the mountains below, and wait. It's dark, but the pull-off has basically a gravel clearing surrounded by woods, and the moon was full, so you could see the whole area very well. We could both see the entire area around the car, and there was no one else there. We both had our windows rolled down. Most of the pull-off area we are in is to my right, since we pulled in more to the left, and we are facing towards the mountains. We were just talking, having a nice time, and my ex flashes his lights 3 times again, since nothing had happened yet. I have my arm hanging out my window, and I'm looking up at the stars, and I loudly announce that this is stupid and nothing is happening. Well, immediately after my announcement, we start hearing the sound of footsteps at the end of the clearing, heading in our direction, toward my side of the car. They were coming fast, but sounded light and quick, like they belonged to a small person, so maybe like a child running. I'm a skeptic first, and figured there must be an explanation. It's quite bright from the moon, so I can see everything, but I'm just not seeing anything running in my direction. I can only hear the gravel crunching and the sound of footsteps. I start hanging out of my window, straining to see what could be heading in our direction, because obviously there must be an explanation, and I want to see what's coming towards us. The footsteps come right up to my car door, and something physically hits my door. I'm hanging out my window at this point, looking at my door and the ground next to it, and never saw a thing. However, whatever invisible thing that ran up to us hit my door with enough force that it made a banging sound, like someone had punched it, and the car rocked slightly. You could see and hear the impact, but could not see what made it. My ex's eyes got big and asked if that was me that did that. He thought I was playing with him, though he had heard the footsteps and knew those had nothing to do with me. I told him hell no, I didn't do that. So he reversed his car as fast as possible and sped out of there and back home as fast as he could. He was looking all around outside as well once he heard the footsteps, but he never saw what was making the footsteps either. He could only hear them.
This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. My grandfather lives in a mountainous area of Miyazaki Prefecture. I used to visit him every summer vacation. It was really great. I loved playing in the river by his house, going fishing, amongst other things. The summer in question, I had been in the river swimming for about an hour. I started to get cold, so I got out and sat on one of the jutting rocks above the river. I loved it because it was like my own private river. There were never usually people around. But that day, I noticed 2 children about 200 meters away. Even though they were quite far away, I was sure that they were elementary school kids like me. I didn't know that there was a school in the area. The only school I knew about was now in ruins. I didn't know about any other kids my age in the area either. It wasn't exactly a well-populated area. They disappeared off in another direction. I thought I'd better get going soon. My parents would be looking for me. I was drying myself off and changing back into my clothes when I noticed something nailed to one of the nearby trees. It was a laminated photo with some text below. The photo was of a woman and 2 children either side of her. She appeared to be their mother. Below the photo, there was only one line of text: "I am looking for these children." It was a bit off-putting. I felt a bit creeped out by this poster in the mountainous woods. The strangest thing about the poster was the fact that the mother's face had been scribbled over with black magic marker. The children's faces had been circled by a red marker. Why would the mother's face be blacked out? Surely she would want to be identified if she was the one looking for the children. Something didn't sit right with me about this poster. I mean, this is deep in the mountain woods. It took about 20 minutes to walk to get to this river from my grandfather's house. And he lives in a very unpopulated area. Weirder still, one of the kids in the poster had a unique hairstyle which made him recognizable. And one of the kids I saw by the river today had the same hairstyle. Close cropped, shaven hair. Things are weird. I wanted to get out of there. So I jogged back to my grandfather's house. And I asked my grandfather about the weird poster. He didn't know anything about some missing kids. Strange. Like I said, the village he lives in is small, and it's a close-knit community. The fact that he hadn't heard about any missing kids was certainly surprising. Something seemed wrong. Later in the year, my family and I went to visit my grandfather again, to ring in the new year. He was having a drink, and the poster came up in conversation. He said he found something similar to the poster that he was sure I would be interested in. I wasn't sure if interested would be the right word. Maybe creeped out was better. He passed a piece of paper to me. I wonder why he saved it. I was really curious now. It was the same poster as last time, except there was something written over the photo. The word "found" in bright red ink. I was really creeped out by this. I took it to a local temple, and I asked the priest to say a prayer for these children, just in case. I have no idea if this poster is an innocent thing or something far more sinister. All I know is that the kids look like they were hiding, and that there's something dark about this situation. Who puts a poster up in the middle of the woods looking for children without asking the locals and blacking out their mother's photo? Who did they think would see this poster in the woods? Was it their mother looking for them? Or was it someone else? Were the kids some kind of cult escapees? I think about this all the time. There is something going on in the mountains.
This all happened back in 1985 and 1986. But these are things that my friend and I will never forget. I was working the summers at an old retreat in the North Carolina mountains with about 50 other young adults. It was great fun. While the place had lots of modern buildings, it was ruled over by a hulking white building built in 1912. I think it's important to note that most of the building is just an extension of the mountain itself. It was built using the trees from right where it stands, as well as the rocks and boulders used for the foundation. It's 3 stories, but really 5, counting the basement and the attic full of bats. It was great watching them pour out of there every night. In front of the building is an enormous portico with white columns stretching up all 3 stories. That porch is full of rocking chairs from which you can see a majestic view of the Smoky Mountains. But the back of that building is where we worked. The back of the building was hugged by 2 large wings, forming a U-shape back there. We entered our housekeeping facilities via a fire escape that stretched straight up to the 2nd floor rear entrance. A single green metal door. That door was one I knew well. Housekeeping was my department for 3 summers, and even though this was now just the end of the first summer, I was well acquainted with it. It was big, green, metallic, and heavy as shit, with a pull on the outside and a bar to push up on the inside to open it. It did not stay open. In fact, fire regulations required it to stay closed at all times, and it was engineered to shut automatically. So, of course, during the summer with no air conditioning in the building, we kept it propped open with a full bucket of water during the day. Regulations be damned. Sorry this is long, but I feel like all this info is important. A few nights before we all left, we were cleaning our dorms and trying to turn it into a party when we all ran out of cleaning supplies. So around 9 o'clock at night, my best friend and I drove our lazy asses down to the back of the building. It was only a short distance, but there was a very steep incline. We didn't want to walk. I parked my car right in front of the stairs and we got out. At this point, we both began to feel odd. The air was still and stuffy, and I felt positively enveloped by this building, standing in the middle with those massive wings rising above us. The building was completely dark, and since we had been shutting it down for winter, it was already locked up tight. My friend had been with me earlier in the day when I had locked the door, the one at the top of the stairs. As we climbed the stairs, I felt positively oppressed and had to stop. My friend did too. I told him I was scared, and he admitted the same. I'd never felt scared of this building before, and I had spent plenty of time in it alone, exploring the basement and attic. We pressed slowly forward again, and a few steps up I literally felt an icy chill down my spine. I know it's a stupid cliche, but I've never felt anything like it before or since. Like someone pressed an icicle down the length of my spine. Finally, we reached the top of the stairs, and the instant I put my foot on the top landing, the freaking door swung wide open and stood open for us, revealing the short entranceway bathed in the red light of the exit sign. It wanted us in there, and we both felt it, but it did not feel welcoming at all. In fact, I've never been more scared of anything in my life. I get freaked out about it now, 37 years later. We both just stood there, completely stunned for what felt like minutes before I completely freaked out, started screaming incoherently, and scrambled down the steps, jumping way too many on the way down. We both ran up the steep incline, yelling and screaming, leaving my car behind. Everyone came down and searched the building with us. It was empty, of course, and the door was shut fast and locked when we got back. No one could have pushed that door open and run away without us hearing them. The floors squeaked when you walked on them, and someone running would have been very loud. I have looked at this from every angle I can think of, but I still have no explanation for what happened. I worked there for 3 more summers in that building, and have many more stories. My friend stayed to work through the winter one year, and saw the Hat Man in the same building.
This happened when I was in university, when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were really dark as I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight. All of a sudden, my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste any time with guesswork, I figured I'd call roadside rescue. I had that as part of my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night. After a little while, a bright light lit up the road and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue were early. I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got closer, I realized that it wasn't them. It was strange. It didn't look like the light of normal headlights. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and didn't move. It was getting a bit weird now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into 2 light sources, whatever was in front of me had only the one source of light. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it. And then I saw them, 3 people, approaching from behind the light. These were very thin and very tall, pushing 2 meters, I'd say, 6'6". As they moved from behind the light to in front of it, I could see the lines in their face. Their faces were really gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about these 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on at first, but then I realized what it was. Their style of clothes and hair, etc. They looked like they were from another time period. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They were wearing chinos, polo shirts, stuff like that. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again I noticed there was something slightly off-putting about these people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. Like he was emphasizing the wrong syllables. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but it just wasn't right. It made listening to them difficult. Yet I detected no accent to indicate that they were foreign.
"Where did you come from?"
he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that. I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because essentially, I couldn't get away from them.
"You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it,"
he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks but no thanks. I had already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent. They kept refusing. I really didn't want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing. Like I had to mentally wrestle with myself not to allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming at the other half, imploring me to get back into my car and get the doors locked again. I couldn't fight it. I started following them towards the light. I was completely transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming to do anything I could to get away from these men, but that internal voice of mine was getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must be the roadside rescue people. It snapped me back to reality. I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that that phone needed to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people. I really wanted to be accurate. I didn't want to be out here anymore. Whilst I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer of help. I hated the way they towered over me. In their faces, they were so pale and thin, like barn owls. I refused. I had to. I ran back to my car with my phone clamped to the side of my head. And that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation, but given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust these men. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was entirely new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their foreheads and then slapped it. It's like as if you're doing a high five to your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I don't have a clue what that gesture is supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and it was gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up. The guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started without issue. That really freaks me out because I know that my engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction the light shot off in and managed to get home without any further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a really strange rash all over my body. I went to see a dermatologist and he couldn't figure out the cause of the rash. I think the rash went away after 10 days or so with the cream and ointment I got from the dermatologist. I'm sure that that rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men, I'm not entirely convinced of that fact. About 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that when she was driving out in the mountains in the same area that I was with her boyfriend, they said they saw something similar to what I did. She said on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people snickered at that, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have some sort of encounter with a UFO? It must be really hard to believe this, but I wish I could just give you my memories or my mind for a while. The fear those 3 tall men instilled in me was otherworldly. That said, I don't know why my mind changed to trusting them like a light switch being switched on and off. It lingers in my thoughts often. It was truly disturbing.
Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle. This means, for those of you unaware, that we have very short summers where the sun never sets, and very long winters where the sun never rises. Those long and cold months of darkness in the end and beginning of the year have made us into an understandably superstitious kind. There were many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have the Stalo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander too far from their home. You have the Myuu, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby. And the Nok, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16 years. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had even bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never had I actually shot grass myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors, and he can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at his workplace and peeled the skin off his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at before almost 2 weeks had passed, and the stench of the bandages had made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. In the end, he needed a skin transplant and several weeks off work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning, and me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour of boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat always know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend when there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the week. That being said, there are never more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be left alone over the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing for my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because out here, they are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter are the things that keep you safe, warm and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip to the cabin. That night, we mostly spent preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter's shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning, due to us just enjoying the calm of a morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake, however. You see, the key point is to be out early, so you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we arrived at the Lavu, imagine a winter version of a teepee that we had set up that summer next to a lake, which was now frozen, of course. My father decided that he would take it easy that day and get the Lavu warmed up, so that when I returned from the mountain, there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I'd previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me, and still does not to this day. So I started walking up the mountain, overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that were hanging in the cabin. This resulted in using way more time than needed to get up to where I could find some grouse I might shoot. As I knew from previous experiences, this was an area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and the area, despite being full of tracks and feces, was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not hear or see anything. So I stalked to the forest upon that mountain for an hour without any traces of life. That is probably when I noticed the silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say. There's always this deafening silence that preludes something bad, like all the animals know to get out of there. I remember for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course, I was not about to go back empty-handed to my father, so I continued. As I was walking around, listening intently to any sound that might give away any other form of life, I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall yet skinny boy, around 70 kilos, 154 pounds. Even though I walked as slow and controlled as humanly possible, the uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break to regain my previously calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, and I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate that I had brought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked at what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps, coming from the direction I had just been in. Loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from four-legged creatures such as moose or bears, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because I immediately thought it was my father who had a change of heart, yet no reply. I sat there on the rock watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out, and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There, on my phone I had an unread message from my father, delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, coupled with knowing that we were supposed to be the only 2 people in a radius of many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and noped out of there as soon as I had tightened my snowshoes. As I was making way at all heist, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace. And I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me was almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference when our feet hit the ground. I realized since then that whatever it was had followed me since I had entered the forest on the mountain, and was the cause of why I felt like my footsteps were being abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layer of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footfall, no more than maybe 2 meters behind me. Yet when I turned around, there was nothing. I pushed all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the lavoo, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in high snow, I made my way to the lavoo. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred. So I said only that I had spotted many tracks, yet no birds. However, in later years, I've asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answer has always been roughly the same.
Don't worry about it, and don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored.
This was the most terrifying moment of my life, always will be. My family and a family friend's family were going on a hiking trip to the Appalachian Mountains. We had rented cabins at a camping site and had arranged certain paths to follow each day of our trip that we would walk each day, 4 days long. The first 3 days went great. We saw wildlife, had a good time and talked a lot. But on the fourth day, we were taking a trail that was more secluded and overgrown than the others. We were walking for about 30 minutes when I was hit with this overwhelming feeling of uneasiness. The feeling just stayed there no matter how hard I tried to beat it back. Then, and everyone else on the hike denies this, but I hear singing in a language I've never heard before. It's like the scene described in the myth of the sirens, sweet and enchanting. Yet the music invoked a feeling of fear down to my bones. Everyone else seems completely oblivious to it. I tried telling my dad that something was wrong, but he just told me I was probably tired and we would stop soon. So about 5 minutes later, and the singing just keeps getting louder, and my heart was racing. We had stopped to rest and eat something as well. I wish with all my heart that we hadn't stopped. About 2 minutes into our little rest, the singing is getting progressively louder, but my nerves have settled slightly. Then, everything falls silent. Everyone in our group, about 12 people, suddenly turns to the trees to our left. A figure, tall and in a black coat, was barely visible between the trees. It was a woman, much taller than normal people are, with pure white hair flowing out of her hood. Her head is down, but her face is still slightly visible. All I can make out is that her skin is a very pale yellow, like old paper. As we watch, she just stalks closer to our group, finally stopping right at the edge of the trees. She looks up, and I swear to God, as long as I live and breathe, I will never forget her face. Her eyes were completely white, with no pupils or irises visible. She had a thin, pointed nose, and had a mouth with lips that were stained red. I don't want to know why. She stares at us for a moment, and then smiles. It was horrifying. She had no teeth, and her eyes began to shine. She then begins to talk. She had a horrible, scratchy, high-pitched voice, and said,
"Leave this place while you still can. I'll be watching you. Don't try anything."
I blink, and she's gone. Everyone is silent. This is the first time telling this story to anyone else who didn't experience this with me. And I never discuss it with anyone who did experience this with me. It feels good to share this experience with someone. So, this is something that I've kept to myself for 2 years now, and every time I think about it, the hair all over my body still stands up. Here's some context. My girlfriend and I really like to try and find new hikes in western Colorado. We decided to try a new trail that was not on the National Monument and was way away from any other trail. It was a good deal of the way out of town as well. Anyways, we were one of the only cars parked at the trailhead, and as soon as we were walking, it quickly got dark. We made it all the way until the moon rose, and I stopped to hug my girlfriend and have a romantic moment. All of a sudden, further down the trail, at least a few miles, we hear automatic gunfire. Pop, 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 then silence for a couple of seconds. Pop, pop, pop. Now, this is kind of a normal thing for my area. Even though this was not public land, I had a lot of buddies who would know of many forgotten trails to shoot on and not get caught. My girlfriend asked me if I thought they were gunshots, and I told her that I couldn't think of anything else in the middle of this wilderness. We decided it would be best to turn back. We were about 2 miles down the trail at this point, at the top of a very large hill, covered in desert shrubs. As soon as we stopped talking, we realized something was wrong. All of the insects had stopped chirping, and there had been dozens of crickets the entire hike up. All of the sounds of nature completely stopped. My girlfriend was facing further down the trail, and I was facing back the way we came, ready to turn back. She looks behind me, then screams and starts to run. I was already scared shitless, but I figured the worst it could be is some drunk redneck about to give us some trouble. I turned and looked where she looked, and I immediately ran after her. I have never ran so fast in my life. The shrubs were about 2 to 3 feet high in varying spots, and when I turned around, I don't know how to describe it, but it looked like a shadow. Even with the moonlight shining directly on it, it was almost an absence of light. It was already slowly standing up when I turned around. As soon as it fully rose up, I realized that I was looking up at it, and it had to be at least a foot taller than me. It had a very skin and bones figure, but it was not human. We sprinted back to my car, still with nature silent the whole way. I was in such a hurry when we ran to my car that neither of us noticed I hadn't needed to take out my keys to unlock the car. We were halfway through the drive home when we realized that every single hair on my body was raised, and if I'm being honest, I've never felt anything like what I did when I saw it. Every fiber of my being screamed run, and I was almost paralyzed by the fear that washed over me. Does anyone have any idea what it could have been? So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginian wilderness. I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known and has a pretty waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail and parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip for my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. No birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus, it had a good sized area to swim in, so naturally, I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was Chill Bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it'd repeat whenever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again, like I'd get goosebumps, and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper aware that, again, there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe and to leave. I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag, but I looked at the rope and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bare footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from the road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday. But it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing my tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting away anything properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling, so I stood up and yelled into the woods, "Shut up!" and "What the hell do you want?" It stopped whistling, and it was quiet for a moment. Then it repeated what I said, in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted, like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my bag on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not actually too close, but not being too far. Eventually, it sounded like it got further and further away from me. Then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wish I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever, coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than a half mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror on my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and asked if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided not to go down to where I came from. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back to my car, I drove to one of the park's ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot runs right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I never drove so fast in my life. When I told my roommate why I was back after only going one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." So, we were deciding to go somewhere haunted during the day. There's this cemetery in Santa Cruz we decided to check out. We go in and walk around and nothing out of the ordinary happened, so we decided to leave. The cemetery is on a supposed haunted road that leads up into the woods. This road is said to be haunted by a lady in white that tries to hitchhike into your car. I'd forgotten this fact until after the day. Alright, so along this road we're driving down, it leads into a forest area. A couple of miles down from the cemetery you can pull to the side of the road and walk along this hiking trail. So we decided to hike this trail because I completely forgot the road was also haunted, so I wasn't even looking for anything paranormal. Anyways, we start hiking this trail in the afternoon. 10 minutes into the trail, we stumbled along abandoned train tracks and a barely standing bridge for the train that used to run along those tracks. It looks cool, so we decide to go down this hill, right by the bridge that lets you go under the dilapidated bridge. We go down there and just mess around, looking at the cool architecture. After we had our view, we start back up the little hill that leads back to the trail. When we get to the top, we are a little exhausted because the hill is kind of steep, and you have to use the trees around you as leverage to climb back up. So we're standing around, back on the trail, when we both notice something out of the ordinary. We hear a voice, like a grown man's shouting and screaming very angrily. When I say angry, I mean angry. This voice sounded like a rage-filled, hatefully murderous man. We quiet down, and I can tell the voice is very far away. Almost sounded like it was in the mountains around us. Sounded more than 500 feet away for sure. We both look at each other like, WTF is that? We stand around listening for like 15 seconds, and next thing we know, the voice came down the trail from what sounded like hundreds of feet away to being like right down the end of the trail. The inhuman speed the voice came closer to us with was unnatural. I noticed the voice coming from down the trail, and I'm thinking to myself, this voice sounds like it's from someone who was about to kill someone out of rage. But the weird thing is that the voice is speaking in what I can only call gibberish. I understood not one word it was saying. I instantly get this fight or flight feeling all in my body because this voice starts getting very loud and closer to us at inhuman speeds. I tell my brother to pick up some huge sticks with me to defend ourselves because even though the voice came out of nowhere and moved down the trail at lightning speeds, I still had the assumption it was some kind of crazy person ready to kill someone. We pick up the sticks and run down the trail back to the car. Now, here's the weird part. As we are running away from this voice that's coming down the other side of the trail, I hear the voice come up behind us in an instant. It sounded like he was no more than 10 feet behind us, chasing us back to the car. I turn around, even though I don't want to, because I have to see how close this psycho is from us. As I look back and hear the voice right behind me, I see no one. I tell my brother to run faster because the voice is right behind us, yelling in absolute rage, but I see no one chasing us. We start picking up speed, and the craziest thing in my life happened. The voice starts panning around us in 360 audio. I hear the voice yelling in gibberish right behind me. Then it starts panning to my left through the trees, just off the trail. Then the voice is right in front of us, and it slides into the right side of the trail, then back behind us in a matter of 10 seconds. At this point, me and my brother are very creeped out and ran the rest of the trail back to the car. The voice kept following us down the trail. I remember, after hearing the voice panning around us and hearing it reverberate through the woods, I started praying to Jesus Christ to help me come out of here alive. After we make it around halfway down the trail to my car, the voice disappears. I remember slowing down exhausted, and we start talking about what we heard. I asked my brother if he also heard the voice slide in circles around us, and he said he heard it too. At that point, I knew I wasn't hallucinating or imagining it. I asked my brother if he heard how it sounded like gibberish, but like a man screaming at the top of his lungs in rage. He said he heard the same thing. We finally get into the car and I drive out of there in a heartbeat. I remember the car ride was silent for like 5 minutes as we just sat there thinking about what happened. That's when I remembered that the whole road was haunted and not just the cemetery. I'd been down that trail alone a few months before this experience and nothing weird happened. This was one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced in my entire life. To this day, I've never been back down that trail and never planned on it either. Everything I've written down is the absolute truth, and nothing has been altered. The Santa Cruz area and mountains are known for cults and very dark magic being performed in them. Stay safe out there, everyone. This story happened in 2020 at 3 a.m. I was in the office at that time with my regular job at a BPO company in Ortigas. I'm a really big fan of paranormal stuff ever since I watched videos of paranormal investigations or actual ghost footage caught on camera. That Saturday morning at 3 a.m, I turned on my voice recorder and just left it recording for a couple of minutes. I'm just curious, what would my recorder pick up at that time, because the last time, in 2018, I recorded a lady sounding like she's in pain, and many of my colleagues had their fair share of spooky moments in the office as well, and my hoodie got scratched by something when I was the only one left in the area. My recording lasted about 16 minutes, and when I reviewed it, there was the sound of a child that sounded like it was playing with someone, or something, at the 7:36 minute mark. And at the 7:41 mark, it sounded like someone snatched a toy from the kid, sounding like an angry child. Note, there were no children in the office at all.
I need to tell someone about what I saw that night. It is still terrifying for me whenever these memories enter my mind. It is perhaps the most traumatizing experience of my life, and I still can never forget this. Back around 2013, before I was going off to college, I was just at home, relaxing this night. My family was preparing to go out, but I decided I will not go with them, as I've had a hard week and I need a night to myself to relax. This was a weekend, I guess Saturday night, and I was left alone in our house. Our house is in Manila, very spacious. We have a bathroom on the 3rd floor near the stairs, and a clear hallway on the 2nd floor with a huge window. I was just relaxing in the living room at this time, and I suddenly feel the urge to go to the bathroom, so I went to the 3rd floor. It was already dark now. I usually don't open all the lights to save the electricity. As I was about to go downstairs, however, I did open the lights, and I was shocked to the view that I had just seen on the hallway. This thing is all white, looking like a spider and a human figure at the same time. Both its hands and legs are on the floor, crawling backwards very fast. The hair, so long, following this figure dragging along. Its mouth, twisted back towards me, hanging open wide. My heart is pumping so fast because it was my first encounter to see this. The sight of this otherworldly entity, not just standing or walking around, but crawling backwards, contorted, disfigured. I scream at this time, and I run to lock my door. I kept on crying. I opened all the lights, and I messaged all of my friends to calm me down. I am still so scared, even after this night, because this is not the last time for me to see this awful girl. She haunts my life. It is rare for me to see her, but it comes so unexpectedly. This is why it is so scary. I never know, what can I expect? The most frightening thing to me, however, is that it's only ever when I open my bedroom door that I see her. And every time I lay eyes on her, she has moved closer to my bedroom. I fear, to the bottom of my heart, that one day I am going to wake to see this thing, arched over my bed, its mouth wide open.
back, Andrew Simmons, an English explorer, visited a small island of Cagayan Sulu. It is a lonely spot of land in the Sulu Sea between the Philippine Islands and Malaysia. There are strange stories on the island related to a tribe of cannibals with cat's eyes called Berbalangs. When hunger for human flesh urges them, they will lie down in tall grass. They will then fall into a trance and go hunting for victims in their winged forms, while their bodies lie hidden behind tall grass. The people of Cagayan Sulu have been living in fear of these Berbalangs for generations. They warned Andrew that the Berbalangs made horrid moaning noises that are loud when they are far away, but grow fainter as they approach. When they are very close to you, the sound of wings flapping can be heard, and their eyes would move in the dark like fireflies. They told Andrew that a coconut pearl, an opal rarely found in the coconut, would keep him safe from the Berbalangs. Without one, the only defense is a kris, a local traditional knife, with its blade rubbed with lemon juice. He tried to buy a coconut pearl, but found out later that it would only protect the one who discovered it. It would be powerless if given or sold. Andrew asked if anyone would come with him to see the tribe. Only one brave young man, Matali, volunteered. They started in the morning and finally reached the Berbalangs settlement in the late afternoon. Matali refused to go any closer. "We've seen it. Now let's go." "We're not stopping now." Andrew insisted that they go on further. "I'm not going in there. If you insist, you go alone." Matali smeared his kris with some lemon juice and handed it to the daring yet somewhat ignorant explorer. So Andrew went in alone. The place looked deserted. Only a few chickens and a goat remained. However, in one hut, Andrew saw some rice boiling in a pot, as if someone had just left it there. Andrew went back to Matali and told him what he discovered. Matali begged the Englishman to leave, saying that the Berbalangs were hunting in their other form. It would be a suicide to stay there any longer. As the sun was already setting, they finally made their journey home. Before they were even halfway back, it was already dark. Suddenly, there was a loud moaning noise. "The Berbalangs," Matali whispered in fear. "Pray they will pass without noticing us." They both hid behind the grass. The moaning grew fainter and fainter, which meant the Berbalangs were getting closer and closer to them. Soon, the sound of flapping wings could be heard. Matali and Andrew began to fear the worst when they saw fireflies flying over the tall grass. They halted for a second, as if they noticed something hidden in the grass, but then left. The moaning began to grow louder, and Matali sighed with relief. "They're gone," he said. "We're safe for now. Hurry, we must go." The two raced for Matali's village. As they ran beneath the tall grass, they could hear the moaning noises, which slowly and gradually grew fainter and fainter. At one point, Andrew saw an isolated house. "We must help the people inside," he told Matali. "The man who lives there, Hassan, has a coconut pearl," Matali said. "Now hurry, we have to escape." Andrew followed Matali, and they got back to their safe village after a short while. In the morning, Andrew laughed at himself for believing that story. He thought it was silly to let Matali's fear and some fireflies scare him. When he met Matali later that day, however, Andrew asked about Hassan. Matali said he lied about Hassan owning a coconut pearl. Hassan had arrived a week before Andrew on some research expedition to learn more about the island. Matali reckoned Hassan could probably be dead by now. Andrew, insisting that the story was mere superstition and was not true, decided to prove himself right by inviting Matali to go to Hassan's house with him. When the two of them got to Hassan's house, no one answered to their calls. They then realized the door was not locked, so they went in they saw a desk with papers scattered everywhere on the floor. Matali went into the room while Andrew walked towards the desk to see what was there. Suddenly, he backed away and shouted for Matali. In the corner of the desk was Hassan, only his skeleton, with a few scraps of flesh clutching a shredded paper. Suddenly, they heard moaning noises outside, growing fainter and fainter and fainter.
This happened 1 year ago. Ever since this, I've been struggling to sleep. I felt like it is always watching me and my little sister, Mai. Our house, it was only recently built, and the surroundings were quite uncomfortable. Also, very eerie. I shared a room with Mai, but we slept in different beds. It was a double-decker bed near the window. We both decided that I will sleep on top while she will take the bottom. On that night, I was expecting a happy dream, but my expectations were shattered ever since I saw her. I was sleeping when I suddenly wake up for some reason. You know when you wake up in a panic, or you feel like you are falling and falling until your eyes will open. It was like that. I could see only a silhouette of a figure. At first, I couldn't tell if this is a man or a woman, or maybe just a light from the window. But it comes closer to me. It becomes more visible. It is bright white. I guess it took me a while to come out of dazed sleep, but I was creeped out when I remembered I am laying on my back, looking up at the ceiling, and that this person, this thing, was looking down, staring at me. Its lips were moving, as if she was mumbling something I could not hear. I tried to avert her gaze, but I could not move, not my eyes, nor my body. I have no choice but to look at this woman. At first I think she looks like Mother Mary, and that time I thought it was her. She was there beside me, her hands clasped together like she was praying. I was supposed to be relieved, but why do I feel so scared? My panting, it grows heavier and deeper. My hands were bare cold and sweating. The scary part of that night was when we both stare at each other's eyes, and then her eyes, it becomes red. I don't know what to do, but my eyes begin to tear up, and it felt like burning. Call it exaggerating, but that's really what happened. Then finally, in one blink, the woman disappears. That was the most grateful blink I've ever had in my life. I tried to sleep again, but I failed. I could only cry until morning came. Since that night, I make excuses so that I couldn't sleep on my bed, afraid that she comes back. Weeks passed. Mai confessed that she saw the same woman. I didn't utter a word as I listened to her story, which was the same as mine. I listened every single detail of the way she described the woman. It was the same. I finally asked if she saw her at my bed, and she nodded as she burst into tears. We tell our mother our problems, and she didn't believe it, but she separated our beds. Time passed, and that woman doesn't come back to us. A month ago, when I was sleeping together with my little sister, I suddenly woke up. I wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. Minutes later, Mai also wakes up when, coincidentally, we hear a bang on the kitchen and the door swings open. I cry heavily when I see that woman again, but this time she was not colored brightly white. She was pitch dark, shadowy black. We were both feeling panicking as she comes closer to us. She was not walking. She was more like floating in the air. Mai held my arms as she shouted and cursed at her. Our grandparents and siblings woke up because of the noise we made. That woman disappeared when the light of the room turned on. We didn't tell them exactly what happened because all we could do was cry again. These days, me and Mai have been dreaming the same thing. Not some happy and nice dream, but a nightmare. In that nightmare, I could see that woman. Or we could see her. Is this coincidence? No way. It can't be. Why would she always appear to us? We do not even know her. But my gut tells me she wants something from us, and I do not know how long it will be before she comes to take it.
In March 18th, 1996, at around 4 p.m. local time, the nightclub, or as commonly referred to in the Philippines as disco, the Ozone Disco, caught fire. It happened in Quezon City, Manila. I had to mention the location to point out that it happened in a metropolitan area. Supposedly such matters could have been avoided or at least dealt with accordingly in a quick manner. You can just imagine it being in the nation's capital, where police and fire servicemen are within a call away, as opposed to it being in a rural area, where it would take quite a while for a response to reach their destination. Now, I was still in the Philippines when this happened. I was 11 years old, and am 24 now, and living abroad. This was a first in the Philippines, as it is said to be the worst club fire in the world. More than 160 people died, and about 92 others were injured. This incident shook the entire Metro Manila, and up to this day, families and friends and simply everyone who knew about this incident still have not coped with the sadness and grief of such a tragic event. As for those of you who are wondering how it happened, well, there are a large number of reasons, but I think the most popular and widely accepted fact was that the doors open inward rather than outward. If you ask anybody, they will tell you exactly that. When the fire broke out, nobody noticed. When the blaze grew, that is the only time people realized that there was a fire. The club being popular at the time, people would naturally flock to it. It became a symbol of social status, and this made it even more popular with the younger generation of the time. That being said, the place was packed, and when the blaze grew, people panicked and they all rushed the only door. See, there's another reason. Just one door and no fire exit. And just imagine, the door opens inward. Even if they tried, nobody could open the doors. Push? How? There was no room. The location of the fated Ozone Disco, or simply Ozone to most people, is now desolate up to the year of writing this, in 2009. Now, here is where my story begins. Soon after the incident, the sight of burnt corpses made headlines. May it be TV or newspaper, internet wasn't mainstream at that time. People would only find the horrible accident that occurred there. It had been the news of the year. People would talk about it, and could not come to accept how a sad and tragic event could happen. The Ozone Disco became a thing of interest, And as you may have already guessed, a great number of hauntings have been reported in the area. This happened a couple of years after the incident. Me and my friend were in a jeepney, public transportation, look it up, at around 9 p.m. on our way to our other friend's house. Our jeep passes by that route, and we would always look out the window at the now desolate place where the ozone once stood. It was just me and my friend. The driver then told us,
You boys keep looking at that place, and you might find something that'll scare the wits out of you.
I then turned to look, and sitting next to the driver was a man with his head turned at 180 degrees, looking right at me. I couldn't stop yelling curses. Luckily, the jeep had to slow down for an intersection, and I jumped out with my friend pacing after me. The place was filled with local bars, not discos, so there were lights, so I was a bit more relieved, but could not brush the horror out of my shaking self. My friend then asked me, "What's wrong?" I told him, "For Pete's sake, did you not see it?" He said, "See what?" I interjected, "The man in the jeep." My friend stopped looking at me with one eyebrow raised. He knew, I did too sorta, that it was just me, him and the driver in the jeep. Think that was the end of that? I really had to be a bother that night, and had to ask my friend to accompany me home, to which he kept questioning my manhood. Upon arriving home, I told him he could stay, but he's not one who believes in such supernatural things, so he refused and left. I was sitting in the couch or sofa, still feeling my heart go a mile a minute. My mum was still awake, chopping vegetables for tomorrow. My uncle, who was a taxi driver, came home. He went to get a drink from the fridge, and then sat down with me in the living room. We started chatting. As much as I hated to bring up anything about the ozone disco, unfortunately he, my uncle, said,
That disco sure is sad, isn't it?
I just said a quick and apathetic, "Yeah." He went on to say,
I mean, it somehow affects taxi business.
I said nothing.
I went by the ozone, but did not stop there. A few buildings from it, I picked up my last customers for the night before heading home. Then, an old man on a rusty old bicycle started to follow me. He seems too old to be able to catch up, but somehow, he does not want to stop following me. I tried to drive a little faster, but my passengers told me not to, as they were not in a hurry. To me, it sounded like easy cash. I can get a high fare just by going slow. The old man, still in view in my rearview mirror, is gaining on me. I came to a red light and had to stop.
Around 12 midnight, stoplights in the Philippines take longer to change.
The old man got off his bike and started walking towards us. He finally stood by my window and knocked 2 gentle knocks. I promptly, annoyed as I was, wound down the window and asked, "There a problem?" And he began to talk in a slow and crackly voice. "I noticed you have been driving around the block. Are you lost?" I told him no, my customers are joyriding. Said man scratched his chin for a second, my uncle told me, and he seemed satisfied enough. But I did notice your 2 passengers don't seem to have any heads, said the old man, as he picked up his bike and went off. My uncle stopped there and went home to get some sleep. Ozone is not of this world. I grew up in the Philippines, and I'm used to powerful typhoons crossing our country. While my hometown is rarely visited by typhoons due to its geographical location, watching the news about the aftermath of the typhoon was just a mundane scene. But on the 8th of November 2013, the entire country was reeling from what could have been the strongest typhoon of the century. Super Typhoon Yolanda, international name Haiyan, wreaked unimaginable havoc in central Philippines, Visayas region. Tacloban City, the regional city of Region 5, was the worst hit. The disaster claimed more than 10,000 lives,
destroyed millions of dollars worth of crops and properties, and displaced millions of people. The locals are used to typhoons as the region's located at the eastern seaboard of the country. However, everyone got caught off guard by the storm surge. No one was aware about the imminent danger days before Haiyan struck the region. No one listened nor cared about the impending danger of the storm surge, which was reiterated a number of times by National Weather Bureau. Thousands of rotting corpses lay along the highway towards the airport, which is located at the peninsula part of the city, sandwiched by two bodies of water. Search and rescue operations were futile as well. The entire city reeked of death and despair. It felt like it was a scene straight out of a high-budget Hollywood disaster movie, only that this one happened in real life. Horrible was an understatement. On March 2nd, 2014, I moved to Tacloban City. It was my first facility assignment after I finished my training as an air traffic controller. First job, first facility assignment. I was feeling excited at that time, and all the terrible things I've read and heard about this city were briefly covered by excitement. The city during that time still had an unstable electricity connection, except for the airport. As day turns to night, the city is plunged into darkness, and it becomes eerily quiet. I stayed at the third floor of the control tower since the staff house was totally damaged by the storm surge. On the third night, I woke up at exactly 3 in the morning. As I opened my eyes, I saw a tall, dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. At first, I thought it was our office assistant. We were 3 in the room at the time. The figure wasn't moving, and it felt like it was staring at me. The room was dimly lit, all thanks to the moon's illumination, but it was clear as day that the figure wasn't our office assistant. I just shrugged it off, thinking that my mind was playing tricks. The next day, I told my experience to my other roommate, my colleague, who also happened to have a strong sixth sense. She nonchalantly said, "We're 6 inside our room. The other 3 are just lost souls, probably typhoon victims. Just pray." The hair on my arms just rose. Weeks later, my colleague and I were the only ones inside the room. We were both on our laptops, doing our own business, when suddenly we smelled something. It was a sharp, distinct smell of an orchid. I got anxious and asked my colleague if she smelled something. From her body language, I could sense that she was really scared. She leaned on me and whispered, "She's right in front of you. Don't forget to pray for her eternal repose." I thought she was joking, but I was feeling cold at that time. I prayed hard that night. The following day, I asked one of the airport employees if he knew someone who loves orchids. "We have a former employee who used to plant orchids and other flowers in the control tower. She died during Yolanda," he said. The hauntings continued, but eventually I got used to it. I occasionally went to the city's cathedral and lit a candle for the eternal repose of the lost souls around the airport. Fast forward to the 7th of November 2014. On the eve of the Yolanda/Haiyan anniversary, I rode a jeepney from downtown to the airport. It was just one ride away, around 30 minutes with traffic. For those who don't know, a jeepney is a ubiquitous mode of transportation in the Philippines. Passengers would sit in front of each other, and the jeep usually has a capacity of 20 passengers, 10 on each side. I was at downtown doing some errands. By 6 p.m. it was getting dark, and I hailed a jeep that would take me straight to the airport. The airport is the last stop, so basically most passengers would alight before me. As we neared the airport, we were only 4 left inside the jeepney. I was seated near the driver, while the other 3 were seated at the middle part. As we neared the airport, the highway became dark. The streetlights weren't working, and there were only a few people walking along the streets. The 3 other passengers, 2 adults, male and female, and 1 male child, probably 7 to 8 years old, were dressed in an ordinary way, nothing spectacular to be honest. I assumed they were local fishermen along the area. Suddenly, The adult male shouted, "Lugalang," which means that the driver should stop, since the family would alight the jeep in the next few seconds. I thought the driver didn't hear, maybe because of the loud roar of the jeep's engine, so I told him to stop. He did and asked me, "You going down, kid? I thought you were going to alight at the airport." I told him that the 3 passengers will alight here, not me. What he did next was truly terrifying. He started to speed up. The road was still dark, however, from the distance, I could already see the runway lights. We were near the airport. I could sense something was wrong. The other passengers were nowhere to be found, and I thought they went down when the jeep stopped momentarily minutes ago. The driver didn't utter a word. I began to break into a cold sweat. My heart began to pound. When we finally arrived at the airport, the facade of the terminal was brightly illuminated by LED lights. Finally, I saw his face. He was terrified. I gave him the fare, and he told me something that made my hair raise. He said, "You were completely alone, even before the dim part of the road." When he told me someone will alight, I sped up. I've heard stories from other drivers just like this one. Did you see them? I nodded nervously. They might be one of the typhoon victims. Some say they aren't aware they're already dead. Please pray for their eternal repose. As I alight the jeep, I noticed that the seat where the other passengers sat a while ago was wet. It didn't rain that time. It seemed that someone spilled a bottle of water or something. And then it dawned on me. They were indeed the lost souls of the area. Remember that the entire city was inundated by a storm surge as tall as a 3-story building. When I was about 8 years old, I had an encounter that scared the shit out of me. I went with my mother to pick up my little sister from school. When we arrived, I asked if I could stay in the car because I was lazy and knew she would be only gone for like 15 minutes. She agreed. I was always an anxious child, so I locked all the doors behind her and tried to make myself inconspicuous. Within minutes, a car pulled up to the spot beside mine. Already this was strange because the parking lot was nearly empty. The door opened, and I saw that it was full of men. There were no empty seats for any potential pickup. I started to get nervous and tried to hunker down. My movement must have caught their eye because they started surrounding the car and pulling on the door handles trying to get in. One man was knocking on the door, saying,
"Come on, little girl. Why don't you open the door for me?"
I remember wondering if I was dreaming because it literally sounded like something someone in one of my anxiety scenarios would say. At some point, after laughing and trying the doors repeatedly, the men got back into the car and drove away. When my mum got back, I was in hysterics, and I explained what had happened. She didn't believe me, and to this day, she still doesn't. I can't say I don't understand why. A few years back, my friend and I were walking around the mall. We had to use the restroom, and the nearest one was this creepy, isolated one towards the back of the mall. My friend would always tell me that bathroom gave her bad vibes, but I thought she was just being paranoid. Anyways, we headed towards the bathroom, and as we were walking, a man walked past us, giving us the creepiest stare. I turned around and noticed he was following us. I quickened my pace and urged my friend to do the same. She was confused, but obeyed. I scanned my surroundings to see if there was a place where we could hide or find a public place, but to my dismay there was only an empty backlot with a dumpster for him to potentially dispose of our bodies. I panicked and ran to the bathroom. Once inside, my friend was asking me what was going on. I explained, and then told her to put her weight against the door since there was no lock. A few seconds later, someone was trying to open it. I freaked out and pushed against the door so whoever it was couldn't get in. The person wouldn't budge, however, and pushed harder. At one point, the door opened a crack, and I was able to see the man pushing against the door. I freaked out and called my dad while simultaneously keeping my weight against the door. What's funny about all this is my friend was not freaking out and giggled at some points. She even suggested to let go and hide under the stalls, and I was so hocked up with fear and adrenaline that I called her a dumbass in the moment. Even funnier was when I told my dad, "Dad, hello? Someone's trying to kidnap us. Come quick." And he was just like,
Wait, for real? Are you sure? Alright. You got the door okay? Damn, well, alright, I'm coming.
Long story short, he stopped pushing, but we still waited a few minutes until my dad told me he was there. We heard a knock on the door, and for some reason it felt like it was safe to finally open it. It was a few girls standing there confused. They asked if we were okay since I was crying. I told them, and they got concerned and described the man I saw, and asked if it was him. That only confirmed it for me. Truly scary. And I'm glad we got out okay. It was around 6 p.m. on a main road. It was winter time, so it was already dark out. I was walking my dog and was listening to music. I'm a 22-year-old female with a tiny 20-pound dog. As I was walking, I saw a car parked down a small side road, out of the light cast by the street lamps. It was a silver minivan. All I could see was a shadow in the driver's seat. I kept walking, but had my eye on the minivan because it was in a weird spot. The minivan eventually started to creep up, so I picked up my pace. The minivan pulled over next to me, and there was a man in the driver's seat. He asked,
Hey, can you help me with something?
and I started to run away. He threw open his door and started to run after me. When he got to the other side of the van, I could see that his pants were around his ankles, and he was trying to run after me. He screams.
I'm gonna fucking kill you.
I ran up to the nearest house, and he pulled off. I left my dog at the door of the person's house and sprinted after his van. I wrote down the make, model, and license plate in my phone, and immediately called the police. He ended up being caught and arrested 30 minutes later in a parking lot, with his pants still down. They found several weapons and other tools in his car, duct tape, zip ties, etc. It was summer in 2001. I was 11 at the time. I was at my friend's house and she needed to go to her other friend's house for something. I didn't know the girl that lived there, so when her friend came to open the door and asked me if I wanted to go upstairs, I declined and waited in front of the house. A couple of minutes passed, and a guy in a black livery car with tinted windows pulled over. He was dressed in a suit. He looked to be in his late 20s or mid-30s. He rolled his front passenger side window down and asked me if I lived here. I told him, not here, but I do live in the neighborhood. He asked if I was able to give him directions to a nearby expressway, so I did. He then said that he couldn't hear me, so I moved closer to him and repeated myself. He told me he was still having trouble hearing me, so I moved in even closer to tell him again. He then asks if I can get in and show him how to get there, and that he'd bring me back. I told him no, I was waiting for my friend and that I couldn't leave. He then started leaning over while still trying to persuade me, and opens the passenger side door. My friend and her friend are coming out of the house at this point, and the guy looks up and speeds off with his door still open. My friend runs over to me questioning who that guy was. I told my parents, but we couldn't do anything because I didn't even get his plates. I wasn't thinking at all. My friend coming out of the house in perfect timing is what I believe saved me. Looking back, I see the red flags, but I can admit, I was pretty naive back then. Since I haven't been doing anything because of this quarantine, I decided to give this a try. This event happened in 2018, and I was 15 at the time. My mum and I usually go to the laundromat every 2 weeks or so, depending on how much dirty clothes we had. We usually go during the weekends because we're exhausted from work and school during the week. It was a Saturday, so that meant laundry day. So we got our clothes together and went to the laundromat. We load the clothes in the washers and left to go run some errands while the clothes were washing. We came back to move the clothes into the dryers. We had some groceries in the car, so my mum decided we could just put the clothes in the dryers, take the groceries home, and come back to wait out the remaining time on the dryers. We did all of that and came back to the laundromat. While we were pulling in, I noticed a large, brownish pickup truck waiting to pull out. I made slight eye contact with the man in the truck, and as we pulled into the parking space, he made a U-turn and parked beside us. He was parked on the driver's side of our car, and I was sitting in the passenger side while my mum was in the driver's side. Me and my mum sat in the car for a while, looking at our phones and talking to each other. I would occasionally look over and notice the man staring directly into the car. He looked Hispanic, and like he was in his mid-30s. I really didn't think anything of it, and would just awkwardly smile back sometimes. A few minutes later, the man got out of his truck and leaned against his passenger side door, which was on the driver's side of our car. I made a joke about it to my mum, saying that he probably wanted to talk to her since she was so pretty. We laughed about it and continued doing whatever on our phones. I couldn't help but feel a little creeped out because he kept staring directly into the car. My mum told me to get out and go check on the clothes, but I was too creeped out to get out of the car by myself. So I told her I'm not getting out because that man was standing right there. She agreed that I should stay in the car and got out. The man moved a bit to give her some space when she got out, and he was parked pretty close to our car. I locked the doors behind her since this was something she always told me to do, and this time it felt necessary to do so. She said hi, and he nodded back. She went in and checked on the clothes. The man ran to the passenger side of the door and tapped on the glass. I pretended not to hear it and just looked at stuff on my phone. It started getting annoying, so I looked up and the man was motioning for me to unlock the door. Now, I wasn't dumb, and I had common sense not to unlock it, so I shook my head no. When I did that, he started banging on the window and repeatedly tugged on the handle to open the door. I got my phone and typed in 911 on the call screen and held it up to the window, hoping that he'd get the message, but he didn't. My mum looked up to check on me and rushed outside and screamed at the man that I was only 15 and whatever he was trying to do, he needed to stop or she was going to call the police. He immediately ran back to his truck and drove off. I went inside the laundromat with my mum, and the lady working there at the time told us that it wasn't the first time that he's done that. She said that he had been coming in there for the past week, trying to talk to any woman or girl because he said he wanted a wife. After that encounter, we never saw him again, and hopefully we never will. I just wanted to share this because I was genuinely creeped out. So this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time, my brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here had this sweet arcade up near the service desk. So every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they'd give us each a few dollars and let us play in the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade is at the front of the store where dozens of people are checking out. So what could possibly go wrong? My brother is playing the claw machine, while I'm standing on the side of the machine trying to help him angle the claw perfectly above a stuffed animal he's trying to get. Suddenly, this random hillbilly walks up to the claw machine next to us, inserts a quarter, and begins moving the claw around. But for most of this time, he's making eye contact with my brother and smiling. not even watching the game. He's not talking to us, just staring and smiling. He has long, thin brown and silver hair, pulled back into a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and a long, scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way he smelled: stout beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like a sweet yet sour dirt or fungus. He tries making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers, but still be polite. Eventually we get bored of the game we're playing, and I usher my brother to follow me to a new game on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, the man follows us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, an overweight lady walks in and says to the hillbilly,
"What are you doing to these little kids?"
and snickers at me. He replies,
"I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals."
She then begins playing the claw on the other side of us, so that my brother and I are sandwiched between these two strange hillbillies. His comment comes across as weird to me because previously I thought he was maybe trying to win something for his kids. But this entire time, he'd just been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us toys. This has been going on for maybe 20 minutes at this point. They've followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games were all 25 cents per play. Each time my brother and I switched machines, they'd follow us. The hillbilly says to the lady,
"I'm out of money. You got any?"
She says,
"Nah, I'm broke too."
My brother says, "I have $1 still." Now this is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school, where our parents work, asking if we've ever done drugs, etc. But when my brother said he had $1, she responded with the most terrifying thing I'd heard from them yet. The woman suddenly bursts out,
"Well, shit, then give it to him, boy."
Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing and gut-wrenching that I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother looked like he was about to cry. He hands her the $1, and her face lights up. She laughs it off, almost like she's trying to make it seem like she was joking when she yelled at us. My father walks up a couple of minutes later. As I turn to tell him that these people have spent close to $15 to win toys for us, they leave, hurriedly, before he gets a good look at them. My dad is livid. He takes us up to the front desk and tells them what I told him. They make an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people and to report to an employee if they see them. Then they call the police. I don't actually remember this part or much of anything after my father arrives, but this is what he told me. They never did find the couple. The police reviewed security cameras, too blurry to make out any physical details, and told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up, without any groceries. Every time I see a man or woman in Walmart that looks as I remember them, I get anxiety and try to avoid them. So, to the hillbilly couple lurking in Walmart, I hope to never, ever meet you again. Edit. I forgot to mention that the two seemed to be in their mid-50s, from what I remember. I believe they were a couple, but I don't know for sure. I don't think she was his mother, though. It seems a few people thought they were mother and son based on the way I explained it, so I apologize for that.